Hello, welcome to this video on Johansson Readings 2, 3 and 4. I've put 2, 3 and 4 into one video here because they're all quite short and they're closely related to each other. There are 3 of the 4 noble truths. So I will call my text up for you. Those of you who were working from the printed book or from a PDF of the printed book, note that in reading 2, the words apiehi sampayogopi dukho, piehi vipayogopi dukho are not there. I don't know why they've been left out. Anyway, I've included them in the text that we're dealing with here. As usual, I'll read it through slowly and then we will analyze the text in detail. Katamancha bhikkhave dukkham aryasatyam jatipi dukkha jarapi dukkha maranampi dukkham sokaparideva dukkhadomanasupaya sapi dukkha appiyehi sampayogopi dukkho piyehi vipayogopi dukkho yam picham nalabhati tampi dukkham sankittena panchupadana kandha dukkha. So katamancha and what bhikkhave, O monks, dukkham arya satyam, supply is the dukkham arya satyam, the noble truth of suffering. I've done a note in the notes section. Sorry, I'm not sharing my screen. Here we go, camera and screen. I've done a note in the notes section on katama. Normally it means which one. I've got several things here. Katama michasi, which one do you want? Asking, inviting the listener to make a choice or to answer the question, which of several. If you see an unidentified object and you have no idea what it is, and you say, what is that, or what are you doing, you'd use kim rather than katama, because you just don't know what it is. Here, it's a halfway through, a halfway house. It's being said, this is the noble truth of suffering. Then what is the noble truth of suffering? In other words, it's not as if you have no idea what it is. You're asking for more information about it. Yes, we know it, a rhetorical question, of course, the Buddha is speaking. So you use kataman, where you already kind of know what it is because as it were, it's been identified what it is, but you are asking for more information about it. What is this truth? What's it about? So that's why kataman is used. So katama, you see, it's written not with the anuswara, but with the N, with the tilde, as if it's all part of the same word. You will often find that in Pali, that for joined on words like cha, and you see the same with pi. You see where I'm highlighting here, tampi. You could write it with a tam, with an anuswara subdotted m followed by p, but it's very common to make it into a full consonantal m or ñ before a cha and a p, and there are a couple of other short enclitics as well. So either is correct. This way of doing it, katamancha, is very common. I mean, you could equally have written, equally correctly, katamam. Sorry, picking that up. Katamam. Cha. That would be equally correct. And the satyam, meaning a truth, that which is, from the root sat, to be. It's a neuter noun, that's why you say kataman. Katamam, what is this satyam? What is the dukkham arya satyam? So kataman in the neuter. Bhikkhave, O monks. It is a vocative plural. It's an irregular vocative plural. Rather than saying it's irregular, it's a survival from the old Magadha language, the old Magadhi. It's not regular Pali, though it so often appears. Just get used to seeing it. Bhikkhave is the old Magadhi nominative and vocative. Primarily, we say it as a vocative plural, O monks. If it were pure Pali, not the Magadhism, it would just be long U. Bhikkhu. Bhikkhu with a short U is the singular. Bhikkhu with a long U is the plural, and the vocative would be the same. But Bhikkhave, the old Magadhism, not pure Pali. So Katamancha Bhikkhave, and what, O monks? The Dukkham Ariya Satyam. Dukkha, okay, dukkha, often translated as suffering, a great deal more than that. Ariya Satyam. You will see in the Johansson book, at page 24 of the printed edition that I have, a fairly detailed explanation explaining the syntax of this compound, Dukkham Ariya Satyam. Whether the Dukkham is an adjective qualifying the compound noun Ariya Satyam, the painful noble truth. That doesn't sound that plausible to me. Or it could be the accusative of reference. That's the Ariya Satyam, the noble truth about suffering. That would be more normal to use a locative there. That is also a possibility. I'm more convinced by the explanation, as I mentioned in the note I've given at the bottom here, that it could be just a euphonic insertion of an M, something that Rune Johansson hasn't dealt with. You find in several compounds in Pali where one prior member ends in a short A and the following one begins in a short A. You do occasionally get that M inserted just euphonically to make it easier to pronounce. So you could say Dukkha Ariya Satyam would be perfectly good Pali. Dukkharya Satyam, making the sandhi between the Dukkha Ariya, Dukkharya Satyam would also be correct. But you do find this inserted M Dukkham Ariya Satyam. It's difficult to say which is the correct interpretation. They're kind of all potentially correct. The one I favour, as I mentioned in my note, is that it's just a euphonically inserted M, the Dukkham Ariya Satyam, in place of Dukkha Ariya Satya, the Dukkha noble truth, meaning the noble truth of suffering. Let me go to my iPad, because Satya. I accidentally misled you by saying it's from the root Sat. It's not. The root is As, meaning to be. And from that root, we get the neuter form of the present participle in Sanskrit is Sat. As you know, in Sanskrit, you have Om Tat Sat Om, that is the truth. From Sat, meaning that which is, and therefore the truth. Sat just means being, that which is. You can make an abstract noun out of it, Satya, kind of beingness, isness, with the meaning of truth, that which truly is, the being, the thing that has being. And Satya then, it's a neuter noun, and that becomes, by normal phonetic mutation, Satya in Pali. And it's a neuter noun in Pali as well, so the plural is Sachani. So the Arya compound, Arya Sachani, is the noble truths. So back to the text. So Katamancha Vikave Dukkham Arya Satcham, the noble truth of suffering. Sorry, reorganize papers here. Jatipi dukkha, jarapi dukkha, maranampi dukkham. Dukkha is two things. It's a neuter noun, so dukkham, and it's also an adjective, meaning painful, or unsatisfactory, unpleasant. So that is why it's jatipi dukkha. Jati just means birth. From that same word we get the Jataka stories, the birth stories, the stories of the previous births or lives of the Buddha. It's from the root Jan, cognate with gen, as in genesis, generate, and so on, meaning to be born, generation, the birth. And it makes its verbal noun, it has many verbal nouns, it adds a T, but instead of janti, it becomes jati. The N drops out and the A lengthens. It's slightly irregular, but that is the origin of the word jati. Now, what is this ending P? It's api. It just means both, including, as well as, even. The exact flavour and tone of it you just have to determine from context. He's saying, look, all of these things are dukkha, and I include all of these things, jati, as well as jara, as well as maranam. There's no very exact translation, though roughly you could say, so what is the noble truth of suffering? Jatipi dukkha. Jati, believe it or not, jatipi is dukkha. Jarapi, as well as jara, as well as maranam. So don't look for an exact translation for P here. It's just this emphatic listing, including possibly of an idea of some of these things in the list you may well accept are dukkha, but others might come as a surprise to you that it's dukkha. Though most of the ones in this list, apart possibly from jati, are not obviously dukkha. Sorry, are obviously dukkha. So jatipi dukkha, so birth is dukkha. Jarapi dukkha, jara, old age. So actually decay. The root jr in Sanskrit means to decay. But it's basically the decaying of old age. So from jiri we get the verbal noun jara, decay. What does Johansson say about it? Old age. He translates it as old age, so actually basically it does mean decay, and by extension old age. It is cognate with the Greek word geros, which means old, aged in the sense of people getting old, and that's why we get our geriatrics, medicine for the aged, and also gerontology, the study of ancient or old things, is from that same root. So jarapi dukkam, maranampi dukkam, from the root mri, meaning to die. I know I've told you all this before, but those of you who are seeing it for the first time, or helps you to have a reminder, we have mrityu, two words formed, or many words, but the two main verbal nouns formed from this root mrit, meaning to die, Mrityu and Marana. The Mrit, of course, cognate with mors, mortal, the immortal, the undying, mors mortis, death in Latin. What's the distinction between Mrityu and Marana? The distinction isn't hard and fast, but broadly speaking, Mrityu, death, means the state of being dead rather than being alive. So it's being dead. Marana sometimes is used in that meaning, but Marana tends more to have the meaning of the actual process of dying. So it's the difference between death and dying. Mrityu, Marana. So I say not a hard and fast distinction between those two words, but broadly speaking, that's how it is. That's why the word Marana is used here, Maranampi Dukkam, because it's what the Buddha is saying here is not that being dead is dukkha, it's the process of dying is dukkha. Dukkha, just look at this word dukkha. Oops, look at it. In Sanskrit, dukkha was correctly written as one word, and by regular phonetic mutation becomes dukkha in Pali. This du is a prefix meaning something bad or wrong. It is exactly cognate with the Greek dis, or deus in classical Greek, this in modern Greek, with rendered in Latin with a dys, as in dysfunction, dysphoria, and that kind of thing, meaning something bad or wrong with it. Ka, the root ka, means space. So this word dukkha, often translated as suffering, pain, and that kind of thing, unsatisfactoriness, it basically means a bad space, or being in a bad space. That's the etymological origin of the word. So it's anything from intense pain to just things not being quite right. Like in English, you might talk about dysphoria. The Greek, from the Greek, dysphoria. Just not feeling right, not carrying yourself, not carrying on right. Opposite of euphoria, you're in a euphoric state, everything's wonderful. Dysphoric state, not wonderful. So that is the meaning of this word dukkha. And as we're often told, just it can generally refer to anything in life, even while you're having a wonderful time. The dukkha is that niggling feeling. Might something go wrong? The feeling, well, life won't be so wonderful when this wonderful moment has passed. That's also the dukkha, the bad space about it. Soka parideva dukkado manasupayasipi dukkha. This is a compound, soka parideva dukkha domanasa upayasa, a compound consisting of 5 nouns all run together. You'll see that the adjective dukkha used as an adjective at the end of it all. Here we are, all these things are dukkha. Dukkha there, that is a masculine plural. In the previous line, jatipi dukkha, the other is feminine singular, to agree with jati, feminine noun. Jarapi dukkha, again feminine singular there, to agree with jara, feminine singular. Old age or decay is dukkha. This dukkha here is the masculine plural. That's because you've got a string of nouns, soka, parideva, dukkha, domanassa, payasa. Because it's a series of nouns, although they're all singular on their own, since they've been put into a compound, the last one has to go in the plural. Even on its own, it would be a singular. It goes in a plural. And it's the masculine plural because the last word of this compound, upayasa, is a masculine noun. Therefore, it makes the entire compound end in a masculine plural. And the corresponding adjective agrees with it, dukkha. Now, these various words in the compound, soka, grief, in Sanskrit it is shoka, and we have the emperor Ashoka, that same word, as being without grief. And the idea was he had a life of happiness, or rather that was the name that his parents gave him in the hope that he would have a life that was Ashoka, without grief, free of grief, a life of non-grief. Parideva, there is the root div. Don't be confused, there's two roots div, homophonous, they look exactly the same, but they have entirely different meanings. One of the roots div means to shine or to be bright, from which we get the word deva, commonly translated as a god, cognate with the English. Sorry, I should be sharing my iPad with you. Oops, where have we gone? Here we are, sorry. I've just been writing for you soka, and then there, Sanskrit shoka, Ashoka, the name of the emperor. Now these two roots, div. The first one makes a verbal noun in deva, that means to shine, basically, div. Deva, meaning a god, a shining being. And it's from that same root we get our English word divine, and the Latin deus, and so on. This other word div just happens to look the same, but a completely different meaning. And the idea is wailing, lamentation, and making miserable noises. You most often find that with the prefix pari. So parideva, kind of wailing about the place, lamentation, it's often translated as. So soka, grief, parideva, lamentation, dukkha. So this is a slightly circular argument here, because dukkha is one of the elements of this compound. He's saying dukkha is dukkha. A bit of a pleonasm there. But we'll let that go. It's in the middle of a big long compound. So soka parideva dukkha domanassa upayasipi dukkha. Domanassa. It's generally sadness, thing, misery. How does he translate it here? Depression, unhappiness. Yeah. Domanassa. Now, we have the noun, we're going to Sanskrit now to explain it. Manas, meaning commonly translated as mind. With the prefix du that we've just been looking at, place that in front of the du manas. And then by sandhi, that h becomes r. Durmanas. The durmanas, it doesn't mean bad-minded, because dur not only means bad, but means wrong, rather like the Greek, the cognate Greek, dis, or dys in classical Greek. So durmanas, bad-mindedness, means things are wrong in your mind. Your mind is unhappy. This is an adjective, durmanas, and you make an abstract noun out of it, from unhappy to unhappiness, or depressed to depression, by the vriddhi, as the vriddhi derivative, make vriddhi of the first syllable, So the up becomes aur, and add ya to the end. So durmanas is the adjective, daurmanasya is the abstract noun, unhappy to unhappiness. And daurmanasya, then by regular phonetic mutation, becomes dormanassa in Pali. Upayasa. Now, we have the root, and I've explained this to you in the notes. We have the root yes, of which the basic meaning is to strive or to exert oneself. Then yes, with the prefix a. Let's make a verbal noun out of that. Ayasa. That's the yes and yasa with the verbal prefix a. That has also the same meaning of exertion, but also not just ordinary healthy exertion, because with the ayasa it means something coming at you, onto you, that you didn't necessarily want. So that has the idea of a trouble, the kind of trouble that makes you exert yourself when you didn't want to, a labour, some trouble that has befallen you. And put the prefix, another second prefix, so Upadhana, which then becomes by Santi upayasa. Upayasa. Again, the ayasa is the trouble, and the upa means up to. So the idea of coming at you, troubles befalling you, troubles falling around your head. That's the upayasa, and the misery, despair. Yeah, he's trying to misery, despair. It's more troubles than despair, I would say. So put these all together, and as I say, upayasa, because it's a masculine noun, they're the multiple things in the compound, therefore it has to be treated as a plural, therefore you put the appropriate plural ending to the last noun in that group, so upayasa. So soka parideva dukkado manassa upayasa pi dukkha. So grief, dukkha, grief, lamentation, dukkha, unhappiness and troubles are all dukkha. Yam pitcham nalabhati tampi dukkham. Yam tam, that which, that. This is a relative. So that yam pitcham nalabhati, that which wanting one does not get, tampi dukkham, that also is dukkha. If you do a logical syntactical analysis of the sentence, yam pitcham nalabhati tampi dukkham, there's a slight kind of looseness of syntax here. We know exactly what's meant, but the syntax itself is loose in the way that I'll explain. So yam pitcham, we'll analyze that too. That which, yampi, and that which, icham. Icham is the present participle, short form, from the verb ichati, he wants. Ichami, I want. Ichati, he, she, it wants. Ichasi, you want. So that which wanting, na labhati, the root lab, meaning to get or obtain, na labhati, he does not get. Tampi dukkham. You could write tampi as one word or tampi as two, like that with the M as far. Tampi dukkham. That which wanting he does not get, tampi dukkham. If you analyse this very strictly, that suggests that it's the thing itself that is the dukkha. Yam pitcham nalapati, that which, wanting he does not get, that is dukkha. But we know that can't possibly be the meaning. The meaning of this is that what is dukkha is the whole business of not getting what you want. That is what is dukkha. Logically, it's saying here, the wanted but not got thing is the dukkha. No, the real underlying meaning is the fact of wanting and not getting. That's what's dukkha. So we just have to accept that this is a bit of loose syntax. I mean, if you just translate it literally into English, if you know, the thing you want but you don't get, that is unhappiness. Okay, a bit illogical, because the thing isn't the unhappiness, it's the not getting it that's the unhappiness. Though slightly loose syntax, though we know what's meant. Yimpicham nalapiti tampidukam sankittena panchupadana kandha dukha. Sankittena, the root kship means to throw. Sankship, to throw together. That means to amalgamate, or to summarize, or to shorten, or to abridge. Sanskrit, sankshipta. In fact, major modern Hindi dictionaries call the Sankshipt Hindi Shabd Sagar, the abbreviated or shorter form. And you've got the shorter Oxford English Dictionary would be the Sankshipt, shortened, abbreviated. So this Sankshipta, of course in Pali, becomes Sankitta. And let's make that into an instrumental. Sankittena, by the abbreviated, means in short, in summary. Sankittena. So Sankittena, in brief, or in summary, Panchupadana Kantha Dukkha, the 5 skandhas, the 5 aggregates of Upadhana are dukkha. Now, Upadhana we have our well-known root da, to give. It makes a well-known verbal noun. Dana, and we give dana. Dana just means giving. Cognate, of course, with dare and donare in Latin. So a donation and dana are etymologically the same word. Ada, this is one of those few but important cases where the prefix a has the effect of reversing the direction of the roots, just like gum, to go, put an a in front of it and it reverses the direction. So agam means to come. Da, imagine direction away from you. Da, give. Ada reverses that. So ada is to take. So the adinna adana, the taking of what is not given. So adana, taking. Upadhana, upa. This we had it a little bit earlier, didn't we? Yeah. Upayasa, yes. Upa, cognate with our English word up, but also means up to, towards. For example, in English, when you talk about you go up to somebody, there's no idea of up and down on a horizontal plane. You go up to somebody just means you approach them. And it's used in that way also in Sanskrit and Pali. When you go Buddham upasankami, went up to him, stepped up to him. So the Upadhana means you take up to yourself, you take to yourself, you hold it. Upadhana. And that's the clinging. Not only do you take it, but you hold it to yourself. Upadhana. So it's the Upadhana Kandha, is the aggregates of clinging. So we also know we've got the Upadhyami, I cling. We've got, and there's with another prefix, samadhyami. Dhyami is just the present I give dhyami. So samadhyami. That also means take to yourself, like upadhyami, samadhyami, but with a subtly different meaning, because in the training precepts, for example, we have panatipata veramani sikhapadam samadhyami. Sikhapadam, a training rule, samadhyami, I adopt. So it's more than just I adopt, it's samadhyami. It's like I take into myself, I make it part of myself. I join it to myself. Sikhapadam samadhyami. So samadhyami, in the good sense of adopting the morality of the training rules. The upadhyami, upadhana is more the morally negative one of the clinging to what should not be clung to. So sorry, and I missed out the apiye. We'll do that now. So apiyehi, pia. In Sanskrit, priya. Sorry. It's just something that's pleasant, beloved. It's from the Sanskrit root pri, which makes the verbal noun priti, something lovableness, kindness, niceness. The name of our current Home Secretary, Priti Patel, that's that same Priti there. The adjectives priya in Pali becomes pia. Incidentally, that p is cognate with our English word friend. So that which is dear or lovable to you, that friend is the same root. So pia, negative, unloved, apia, and you double the p there because it's a pr in Sanskrit. So apriya in Sanskrit becomes the apia in Pali. Apiyehi is the ablative plural because it's sampayoga and vipayoga. You talk about being joined to or to be separated from. In fact, it's the instrumental and ablative because the sampayoga would take an instrumental, vipayoga separation would take the ablative. It just by coincidence, in the plural, they both end in ehi. So apiyehi, sampayogopi dukho. So sampayoga, yuj, meaning to join, verbal noun, yoga, like word we use in English now, yoga, it just means joining, union, cognate with the word join, Latin junction, jungere, joining. In fact, the Latin jungere, French joindre, it's come into English by a different route from join. I think it probably did come from French, actually, ultimately, joindre, join. So this is the same word, yoga. Prayoga just means slightly emphatic, joining up, and some prayoga is doubly emphatic, being united with. So apiyehi sampayoga would mean being united with, closely united with the piyehi. And apiyehi sampayoga would mean being in close contact or closely united with the apiyehi, the unloved. Now this, and equally piyehi vipayoga, vi with prefix, the negating or separating prefix vi, so I should say not negating, separating. Viprayoga in Sanskrit, vipayoga in Pali, being uncoupled, the viprayoga, the taking apart of the prayoga, so the disjoining, the uncoupling, separation. Piyehi vipayoga, the separation from the piyehi, from the love, from the dear. Dear people or dear things or both? Well, potentially both. I'll tell you why. If you wanted to talk about dear people, I'll do this in Sanskrit and Pali. Dear people, you would use the masculine plural ending priyah, priyah, dear people. In Pali it just means piya. If you wanted to talk about dear things, generally that which is dear rather than people who are dear, in Sanskrit it would be priyani. That's note that subdotted n because of the preceding r. And in Pali it would be piyani. In fact, I don't think in Pali you'd put a subdot there. Don't think you would. Piyani. So if you are speaking in the nominative, then you would have to distinguish, are you talking about dear people, piya, or dear things, piyani. If you're speaking in the ablative, now the ablative in the masculine and neuter declensions, they're distinguished only in the nominative and the accusative. Once you get to the other cases, there's no distinction between masculine and neuter, which is incidentally the same in Latin and Greek. So, priyehi, in Pali, piyehi, apiyehi, it could be things or people or both. You might even be, we might even be invited here to hold both in our mind, people and things, who and which are dear. So apiyehi sampayogopi dukkho. So being united with the apiyehi, with undear things, unloved things, is dukkha. Piyehi vipayogopi dukkho. So the vipayoga, the separation from piyehi, ablative, is dukkha. And yam picham nalapiti tampi dukkham. So that brings us to the end of reading 2. I will read it through again for you, and then in the course of this same video, we'll go on to reading number 3. And bear in mind, I'll be reading it now from the fuller text and not from the more abbreviated text as given in Johansson. Let me expand this for you. Okay. Katamancha bhikkhave dukkhamare satcham. Jatipi dukkha, jarapi dukkha, maranampi dukkham, soka parideva dukkhado manassupaya sapi dukkha. Appiyehi sampayogopi dukkho, piyehi vipayogopi dukkho, yam pichham nalabhati tampi dukkham. Sankittena panchupadana kandha dukkha. Okay, that's it for reading 3. I will now, reading 2. I will now proceed to deal with reading 3. Right, we resume now on reading 3. Katamancha bhikkhave dukkha samudayam arya satyam. Yayam tannaha ponubhavika Nandiraga Sahagata Tatra Tatrabhinandini Sayatidam Kamatanha Bhavatanha Vibhavatanha. Katamancha Bhikkhave, and what, O monks, is Dukkha Samudayam Arya Satyam. The analysis of this Dukkha Samudayam Arya Satyam is exactly the same that we had in reading 2. That's the Dukkham Arya Satyam, now the Dukkha Samudayam Arya Satyam. Dukkha Samudayam Arya Satyam, the noble truth, the Arya Satyam of the arising of Dukkha. The word Samudaya is the root E, to go. Many of you will have heard me telling you this many times. It's the same E as in Latin, root E, ire, to go. In Latin, to go. And just it equals he, she, or it goes. As in ex it, he, she, or it goes out. And it's come into English as well, of course. Exit, just he, she, or it goes out. So E. It makes a verbal noun in aya. So aya, meaning up, udaya, arising, coming up. With this prefix some cognate with the Latin con and co, meaning with. It often has the meaning of a completed or perfected action. So udaya just means arising. Samudaya tends to mean more of an coming into being and arising and then forming something, like something arising, being born, being there, the samudayam. Just rather like the bhava, from the root bhu, to be. Sorry, I have failed to show you my iPad screen. So sorry, as I've been doing the E, that's here. From ire, to go, it, exit, aya, udaya. I'm telling you about some for samudaya. The root bhu, bhava, to be, sambhava, put a some in front of it. And that means birth. So it's the idea of not just being, but coming into being, a process resulting in a bhava, a being there, sambhava. So samudaya is the same kind of meaning, not just motion upwards, but coming into being. Samudaya, coming up and forming something, being something perceptibly there. So dukkha samudaya, the arising of dukkha, so the coming up, resulting in there being dukkha as a perceptible thing there. That's the dukkha samudaya. Ya ayam tanha purno bhavika nandiraga sahagata. So tanha, it's the Sanskrit is trishna. Trishna, by phonetic mutation, tanha in Pali, it means thirst, literally. And it's actually cognate, directly etymologically cognate with our English word thirst. Trishna, thirst. In fact, our English form is slightly closer to the Sanskrit even than the Pali form. So thirst, as a physical sensation, needing liquid, and then of course by extension used to meaning a mental thirst, a desire for something, a craving. So ayam, it's a feminine noun, and so it goes with the feminine form, ayam, this. So ayam tanha, this thirst. So here, as very often, it's preceded by the relative ya ayam tanha. Which this thirst, which you might rather clumsily translate as that which is this thirst. If you omitted the ya, ayam tanha, it would have exactly the same meaning. So in a sense, you could say it's pleonastic in the sense of more words in the sentence than are necessary to convey the full meaning. It's slightly emphatic. It might be translated as this very craving, this very thirst, rather than just this craving, this thirst. So yayam tanha, that which is this thirst, punobhavika, leading to rebirth. Again, let's go back to Sanskrit to explain the punobhavika. Punar means again. It's actually cognate with the Greek palin, meaning again, as in palingenesis, rebirth, a palindrome, going over the same way again, like when you can read the word backwards because of the order of letters, palindrome. So punar, again, punar bhava, bhava being. You see, punar bhava, literally again being, which is one way of saying rebirth, coming into being again. Now let us make an adjective. This is a noun, punarbhava, again being. Let us now make an adjective out of it. Now how do we do it? We change the a into an ika, which is cognate with the Greek ending ikos, which we have in English as an ik. You can make it economic, all sorts of words ending in ik, from that Greek ikos, Sanskrit ika. So when you put the ending ika onto an end, you vriddhi the first syllable. Just as, for example, one of the ways we discussed in reading 2 of making an abstract noun, durmanas, in Sanskrit, durmanas daur, with the vriddhi, daurmanasya. So here we get punarbhava, make an adjective, paunarbhavika. So that u by vriddhi becomes au, paunarbhavika. Paunarbhavika. Now, Pali, as we know, doesn't have an au, that becomes an o, so we have po. Now, you'd expect it to be paunarbhavika, ponabhavika, but in fact what happens is that this slightly irregularly, this a here, also gunates, ponabhavika. It's a slight irregularity. It's not justified by the Sanskrit form, which is paunarbhavika. Probably by attraction, because the word starts with a P, it's got a labial after it, a B, starts with the B. So the up might become an O, more labialized lip sound, O, by attraction, as it were, so ponobhavika. In Sanskrit, you've got the punarbhava, so you get the conjunct bh, which normally you would expect to be double BH in Pali. It's optional in this word, as in actually with many words that have got punar in front of them in Sanskrit. if it's then punar followed by another word beginning with a consonant, in Pali, sometimes you double it, sometimes you don't, sometimes it's optional. So you might say, if the r followed by the consonant after punar, then it's optional in Pali whether you double or not. So punobhavika or punobhavika with a double V, they're both correct. In the dictionaries, I think I'm right in saying you tend to find it mostly without the doubling, but basically treated as optional. And in either event, it makes absolutely no difference. So yayam tanha punobhavika, this reincarnationary thirst, this thirst that causes or is related to, or is the cause of punabhava, punobhavika. And it's a feminine adjective because it's the tanha is feminine, so it's here punobhavika. So this reincarnatory thirst, this rebirth causing tanha, the rebirth causing thirst. Nandiraga sahagata. Root gum, to go. Gata, gone. Sahagata, saha, with. So sahagata, literally with gone, means accompanied by or associated with. So this tanha, that is Nandiraga sahagata. Again, sahagata in the feminine to agree with tanha. This Nandiraga sahagata, which is associated with delight and passion. Nandi is delight, and raga, passion. Raga, you see. It's actually cognate with our English word rage. Nandi is delight. You often find it with an A in front of it. Ananda, like the Buddha's cousin, was it? Ananda, meaning delight, a very common name. So Nandi, another form of the verbal noun is an E, so Nandi raga, delight and passion. Sahagata, associated with delight and passion. Now from that same root Nand, from Nandi and Ananda, you get Abhi with the verbal prefix Abhinand. So if somebody take delight in something, Abhinandati. As I mentioned in the notes, not necessarily in a morally negative sense. We find that same verb is used, Abhinandanti, Abhinandingsu, for the monks who delighted in the words of the Buddha. Many suttas end in those words, where you get, I've written it in a note here, the word Bhagavato Bhasitam Abhinanditva Anumuditva, delighting in and rejoicing in the Bhasitam, the spoken, what was said by the spoken words of Bhagavato, of the Blessed One. So atra tatra abhinandini. The abhinandini, it is an adjective. So abhinandati is the verb. Abhinandin as an adjective ending in means having the characteristic of doing something. So we have, for example, the dukkha nirodha gamini patipada, the way that gamini, that goes to the dukkha nirodha, goes to the ending of suffering, gamini. So abhinandin, taking delight in, feminine abhinandini. So this tanha, again feminine noun to agree with tanha. So atra tatra, atra here, tatra there. atra tatra abhinandini by Santidan atra tatra abhinandini. Actually, in the text, it's tatra tatra abhinandini. Maybe I made a mistake when transliterating it, did I? So let me call up this text again. Tatra tatra abhinandini, and here I've written atra tatra abhinandini. Both would be correct. Atra tatra, here and there, and this would mean tatra tatra, there and there. It effectively has the same meaning. All over the place, here and there and there, all over the place. So abhinandini means seeking pleasure. Tatra tatra abhinandini, seeking pleasure here and there. So going everywhere it possibly can to find pleasure. This thirst. Nandi raga sahagata, this tanha, the thirst. Nandi raga sahagata, conjoined with, associated with delight and passion, and the raga. Tatra tatra abhinandini. So tatra tatra abhinandini, seeking pleasure here, there, and everywhere. Sayatidam. I found it in the text as sayatidam, which I'm highlighting here. I think you'll more often find it with a long E. Both words exist. The sayatidam with a long E is more common. Sayatidam, namely, it's a slightly odd word, this, the sayata. It would be tadyata, literally that as, meaning as follows, such as, namely. The se, it's from the Magathi, whereas we get tad, meaning that in Sanskrit and Pali. The Magathi form actually is se, which is never used, as far as I know, it's never used on its own in Pali. It's one of these survivals from Magathi, like the vocative plural bhikkhave that we discussed in reading number 2. So sayata, it doubles the way, sayata is tadyata, literally that thus. It's just the idiomatic way of saying that thus, that as this, sayata idam, tadyata idam, sayatidam. That as this is just the idiomatic way of saying as follows, or namely. Kama tanha, the thirst for kama, pleasures of the senses. Bhavatanha, vibhavatanha. Bhavatanha, thirst for being. Vibhavatanha, thirst for non-being. Now, it's a very interesting point. What is meant here, sorry, I've just forgot to share my screen, my iPad with you again. Here we are. So I was trying to write sayata, tadyata, and so on. These words, bhavatanha, vibhavatanha. Bhavatanha, thirst for being, yes. Vibhavatanha, thirst for non-being. Vibhava, being separate, vibhava, being separated from being. Often translated as annihilation. Vibhavatanha, thirst for annihilation. Now, okay, I can't actually quarrel with that as a translation, but what I do is I invite you to consider a far more ordinary meaning for these words, to coincide with our ordinary human experience, so ordinary everyday, moment by moment, less enlightened moments human experience, where the bhava tanha, if something is happening just the way you like it, if you enjoy it as it is, you have what we could quite properly call a bhava tanha, the tanha, the thirst, the craving for the bhava, for this being, craving for either the lovely things as they are to continue this way, to thirst for continuing in being, or thirst for something to be, to come into being, which isn't yet there. Equally, that would be a bhava tanha. So it's not thirst for your own existence, which we pretty much take for granted anyway, but it's thirst for something to be that is not yet, but you want to be, or thirst that something that already is will carry on like that. And conversely, vibhava, tanha, the unbeing, separation from being thirst, separation from being thirst, thirst for vibhava, unbeing, could equally be not annihilation, as I say, as it's often translated, but thirst for things to be otherwise than they are. I don't like it here. I wish things were a different way. I wish I was something else. I wish circumstances were different. The vibhava, whatever is for you now, you have the vibhava tanha, the craving for it to be otherwise, to get rid of how it is now, for it to be something else. So as I say, I don't challenge the translations, thirst for being and thirst for annihilation, but I believe that we can equally validly look at these much more everyday experience interpretations of them. And like many cases in Pali, we find the same in Sanskrit. We might be invited to hold both meanings in our minds simultaneously. That often happens. Just let these words speak to you, and they can speak to you at one of two levels: the thirst for existence or the thirst for things to go on being as they are. Both equally valid interpretations, and likely the craving for annihilation, which, is not a common human experience. Many of us will not like things to be the way they are, but an actual craving for annihilation, I would say, from my limited experience, is not a common human phenomenon, whereas thirst for things to be otherwise than as they are right now is a very common human phenomenon. So I will read reading 3 through once more, and then we'll go on to reading 4. Katamancha bhikkave dukkha samudayam arya satcham. Right, let me get the text up for you. Here we are. I'll start again. Katamancha bhikkave dukkha samudayam arya satcham. Yayan tanha ponubhavika nandi raga sahagata tatra abhinandini sayyatidam kamatanha bhavatanha vibhavatanha. By the way, those of you who spotted me reading a long E, where it's a short E, I did that deliberately. I think the sayyatidam is the more common form, but they're both correct. Right, we will now proceed to reading 4, all in the same document. Now, reading 4. Katamancha bhikkave dukkha nirodham arya satcham yotasayeva tanhaya asesa viraga nirodho chago Patinissago Mukti Analayo. I'll read it once more. Katamancha bhikkave dukkha nirodham arya satcham. Yo tasayeva tanhaya asesa viraga nirodho chago patinissago mukti analayo. So katamancha bhikkave dukkha nirodham arya satcham. Katamancha bhikkave, and what, O monks, is the Arya Satcham of Dukkha Nirodha, and the analysis of Dukkha Nirodham Arya Satcham is the same as in the previous 2 readings, namely the Dukkham Arya Satcham and the Dukkha Samudayam Arya Satcham, Dukkha Nirodham Arya Satcham. The root rud, let me call up my Rud, meaning to stop or to block or to oppose. Nirud, the prefix nirud, much the same meaning as rud. Nirodha, ni has the slight idea of in and down, so holding back, stopping down, all about shutting and shutting down, stopping and stopping down, or stopping up. That's the nirodha. And of course, very frequently used in Buddhism, meaning the cessation, the sensation of undesirable qualities and things. So dukkha nirodham arya satyam, the noble truth of the nirodha, of the cessation of suffering. Note that nirodha can have both an intransitive and a transitive sense. It can mean the coming to an end or making an end of something. So both senses, so transitive and intransitive. So your tasayeva tanhaya ses viraga nirodho chago patinsago mukti analayo. So you're that which is the nirodho. Let me call up the text again. You, which, or that which is the nirodho, that which is the ceasing, the asesa viraga nirodho, that which is the remainderless dispassion and passionless ceasing, tasayeva tanhaya. Tasa is the feminine singular genitive, tasa, of that, tanha, nominative genitive, tanhaya, tasa tanhaya, of that thirst. So tasa eva, of that very thirst. In other words, that very same thirst I've just been talking about in the previous noble truth. Tasa eva tanhaya, of that very thirst. So your nirodho, that which is the cessation of tasa eva tanhaya, of that very thirst. What kind of nirodha? Is the asesa viraga nirodha. Now, analyzing this asesa viraga nirodho, go to so you've got the asesa viraga nirodho of tasayeva tanha, of that very thirst. Now, viraga and nirodha can be treated as a dvandva, dispassion and ceasing. So, the tanhaya of the thirst, the viraga, tanhaya virago, the dispassion or the separation from passion, the becoming dispassionate of that thirst. It's the dispassion of the thirst. It doesn't sound very good English, but it's the separation from passion, the becoming passion-free from that thirst. Viraga nirodha, or the dispassionateness, the dispassion and sensation of that thirst. So that thirst, losing its passion and ceasing. There is one possible interpretation of it. It's not the most transparent of compounds, and I can't say yet that I'm absolutely satisfied with this interpretation. It's translated by Johansson here, the complete indifference to and sensation of. So viraga translated as indifference to. Yeah, okay, I don't quarrel with that. Asesa, it's from the root shish, meaning to be left over. or to remain behind after other things have gone. So shesha in Sanskrit is a remainder, something that's left over, and ashesha, remainderless, in Pali asesa, meaning with nothing left over, literally remainderless. Translated here as complete. Yeah, okay. But asesa, with nothing left over. So the asesa viraganirodho, the remainderless indifference to viraga, becoming free of passion, and nirodha, and cessation. So tasaya tanhaya asesa viraga nirodho, the remainderless dispassion and ceasing. And now it just continues as a series of nouns: the ceasing, the abandonment, the renunciation, liberation, non-clinging. So chago, in Sanskrit, there's the root tyaj, meaning to leave, and it makes its verbal noun tyaga, and as so often the j of the verb becomes a g in the noun, like yuj, yoga, and so on. And tyaga, as usual, becomes chaga. Chya becomes a ch in Pali, chaga. It's leaving it, abandoning it. Patinisagga, you'll see that in my notes I've maybe run away with myself. I've started off with the root srij sarga, which means to emit, to send forth, to let go. Nisrij, nisagga, abandoning. Patinisagga. Don't bother too much about the different Sanskrit meanings that I've given you there. For the purposes of what we're reading in Pali, the patinisagga means letting it go, the complete letting go. And sometimes as renunciation, abandonment. But very often in modern psychology, we'll talk about letting it go, as opposed to hanging on to it. Say resentments and anger. So the letting go is this patinisagga, the releasing forth as if something wants to go, but you're holding it. Patinisagga, send it forth, let it go out, away from you. Mukti, relinquishment. It's I'll give you my iPad again. Oh, well. It's the root much. Again, it means to let go. Also, if you shoot an arrow, you let it go. Mukti, like releasing your arrow, firing off your shot. The much makes the verb much plus ti, to make a verbal noun out of it. The muchti, you can't have a muchti, so it becomes mukti. Mukti, and also in Sanskrit, mukti and moksha mean pretty much the same thing. It's often used in absolute terms in Hinduism, just your moksha, meaning liberation. In other words, you have been released from. You aren't shooting the arrow. You are like the arrow. You've become mukta. You have become released, shot away from the trammels of the world. That is mukti. But here, in this sense, in Pali, the mukti is you yourself are releasing it. But it could also have an intransitive sense, like among the Hindus. It is the mukti, the being released. So mukti, as usual, in Pali becomes mutti. Angela Merkel used to be called Mutti, like mummy in German. Anyway, this is Mukti, the liberation rather than mummy meaning of Mutti. Where were we? Patinasaka Mutti Analaya. Oh, I do love this word. Li means to either to attach to something, to stick, or to lie down, to lie against it. Both meanings are there. That's where you go to lie down. Sometimes one might feel very, not only lying down, but almost stuck to your bed. That's a sensation I often have on a cold morning, early on a cold morning. It's not just lying in it, but being stuck there. This li has both meanings. And actually, it's etymologically cognate with our English word lie, not telling an untruth, but lying isn't lying down. So li, and with the prefix, the verbal prefix li, it means to that where a place going somewhere to lie down, your abode where you go to lie down, your safe place of rest, with the idea also of the attachment there, where you naturally want to come back, be at rest, be attached to, lie down. This notion is involved in the ali. And it makes the verbal noun alaya. Alaya has now two meanings. It means both an actual abode of something, the place where something resides, or a store. We have the alaya vijnana, what's sometimes translated as the store consciousness, the alaya vijnana. We have the word hima, meaning snow, and so the Himalaya, that becomes now by Santi just Himalaya, which we say Himalayas in English. It's the Himalaya, the snow abode, the abode of snows. Himalaya, that's what the word means. And in the sense of clinging, you have analaya. Analaya. And it's used also as a name, as a monastic name, actually. There's the well-known monk Analayo, who wrote those books on the Satipatthana Sutta, Analayo. So Analayo then has two meanings. It could mean either somebody who is without clinging, who's free of clinging, or who is without an abode. And those meanings overlap. Just look at where the word comes from, and you will see how there is an overlapping of meaning. Without an abode, like homeless, and without clinging, without attachment. So Johansson is translated as aversion. I can't quite make it mean aversion. I suppose non-attachment is a kind of aversion. I mean, aversion is the so to speak positive, active form of that which non-attachment is the passive or intransitive form. But just look at that word in itself and understand what it means in itself, without having a lying down in it, without having an attachment in it, without taking up your abode in it or wanting to be there. So let me read this short passage again. Here we are. Katamancha bhikkave dukkha nirodham ariya satcham yotasayeva tranhaya asesa viraga nirodho chago patinisaggo mutti analayo. Right, that brings us to the end of reading number 4. Thank you.